Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again with another video. Today I will be reviewing Book 3 in Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series, this one being Voyager. This is adapted as Season 3 of the hit Stars series by the same name, Outlander. I will say right off the bat that I'll be starting this review with more vague general thoughts, trying my best to avoid spoiling anything at all from this book or even from the whole series. But then, however, I will let you know when I'm going to be moving into and talking about specifics, at which point I'll definitely be spoiling the first two books, as well as several plot points and developments from throughout this third one. That being said, let's get into it with my spoiler-free thoughts on Voyager. So what is this book about? Very generally, without spoilers, well, the whole premise of this series begins with Claire Randall, a World War II field nurse, accidentally traveling back in time and getting wrapped up in this conflict between the English and the Scottish back in the 1700s. Claire Randall also meets a young man in that time by the name of James Fraser, and a romance follows from there between Claire and Jamie. Now, while that's the general premise of the whole series, this third book covers a series of adventures in a stretch of time in which a lot of the main cast find themselves in different places, split apart. I would say there is a large emphasis on seafaring historical fiction in this book that definitely isn't present in the other ones. So, like, if someone were to say, is that the one with the boats in the Caribbean and Lord John and all that, you could reasonably respond and say, oh yeah, definitely, that's Voyager, Book 3. And therefore it's a very distinct volume in this massive series, similar to how I think you could identify the second book, Dragonfly and Amber, as the quote-unquote one with the Paris stuff. I do think this entry, Book 3, Voyager, also has an increased focus on growing up, what it means to still be in love and stay in love while maturing, aging, what it means to take care of younger generations then, too. Anyway, still broadly speaking, what did I think about it? First and foremost, I want to say right off the bat, I love this book. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably give it somewhere between an 8 and a 9. I did, however, enjoy the first two books of the series a little bit more. I think that if you read the first two, or if you're starting out the series, you might notice a relatively slower pace to those first books, but then this one, Book 3 is much faster. This pace is quickened not only by the fairly breakneck pace of actual plot events in any given storyline, but also by the fact that our main characters often spend their time apart from one another. So if your favorite thing about this cast of characters is seeing them interact with each other, sure, you'll still get hundreds of pages of that, but you also get hundreds of pages worth of being introduced to all of the new casts of characters and settings that our characters are now meeting and pulling into this epic adventure. I do think the character work is as sharp as ever here, and even though this mass market paperback edition is over 1,000 pages, when you get to those last 100 pages or so, you start to see how Gabaldon has really taken everything set up early on, and she's using all of that character development and all of those storylines to really tie things up together very nicely, both on a plot level and a thematic level. If I had to point to one kind of vaguer or more general reason, though, for why I prefer the first two books of the series, I'll just say that a lot of convenient things happen in this book. So many chance encounters, so much island hopping, and people just happen to wind up exactly kind of where they need to be. So much good luck and expediting research and kind of investigation scenes. And last but not least, there's so many close calls with death. And all of that, it kind of starts to get a little bit too wild, a little bit too unbelievable. A little bit too wild, a little bit too unbelievable. Still an outstanding book, but if I have to dock it for anything, I think that's what it would be. Also, I should mention the ways in which the characters talk about, like, African slaves, as well as how the characters talk to and talk about a Chinese character. All of the language that they use can be a bit uncomfortable at times. Now, bear in mind, I'm sure Gabaldon herself has a much more appropriate and like respectful 21st century attitude towards different cultures and peoples. But she does have this difficult task of kind of showing us not only the 1700s through the lenses of characters not only from that time, but also some characters from a time that's no more recent than like the 1960s or so. So you will see these characters thinking in pretty stereotypical, and by our standards today, pretty offensive terms sometimes. But all in all, another marvelous chapter in this epic historical fiction romance Gabaldon is telling here. Now, onto the spoiler section. Spoiler warning, you've been warned. Here we go. More specifically, on the plot level, what is this book about? This book begins right after Jamie has just miraculously survived the Battle of Culloden back in 1746. And Claire has just survived, miraculously, another trip through time, back through the stones, back to the 1940s. So for the first 300 or so pages, we're bouncing back and forth between both of these characters on each of their timelines. Claire, in one setting, she's in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. She's immersing herself in the medical world in Boston, learning to become a doctor. She's dealing with a loveless, or at least a passionless, marriage with Frank Randall. And of course, she's raising her and Jamie's daughter, Brianna, a daughter who only survived because Claire journeyed back through the stones to a time where they had medicines and things that could make the birth go easier. So Claire and Brianna, after the death of Frank Randall, Claire's husband in the 1900s, after his passing, Claire and Brianna, they're researching whatever might have happened to Bree's birth father, Jamie, and they're working with Roger Wakefield, a historian in Scotland, to try and see if Jamie might have actually survived Culloden. Now, we the readers, we're privileged with Gabaldon bouncing us back and forth between their research and the actual storyline of what Jamie had been up to since Culloden. So I really think it's this brilliant, fast-paced structure where we'll get sequences of Bree, Claire, and Roger come across information that reveals Jamie at one point in time was hiding out in a cave. And then Gabaldon will take us, the readers, back to that time, and in third person, with Jamie, unlike Claire's first person point of view, but Gabaldon will take us back to Jamie and tell us the story of what Jamie's going through while he's living in that cave. Then, back in the 1960s, the research team continues, and they find out he was then in prison for a while. And again, we flash back now to fill us in on the more close-up details of what was actually happening to Jamie while in that prison, in Ardsmuir prison. So on and so forth. The story progresses in this really captivating and addicting structure until Claire finally has a good idea of Jamie's whereabouts and a good idea that he is actually still alive, unlike she had originally thought that he passed away during that battle. So Claire is ready, and she travels back in time to reunite with him. So then, after that point, the next 700 pages are all about the two of them surviving the perils of things like Jamie's smuggling business, the perils of the open sea, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and then Caribbean island hopping, and a bunch of other madness that kind of goes down. But I would say that back 700 pages or so of this book is a lot more similar to the first two books, and the first 300 pages going back and forth between the timelines, these characters pulled apart. I think that is definitely one of the more standout sections of this book, at least in my opinion. And going forward with this review, I really do want to focus on three main ideas for the rest of the video. I could praise and critique a lot of more general things that could apply to any of the first three novels in this series, but the three things I really want to focus on are all, so far at least, unique to this book, Voyager. And these are, number one, I want to talk about this book's pacing. Number two, I want to talk about what Gabaldon does with Jamie's character arc and growth in this book. And then number three, I want to talk about the themes about loving people no matter how they've changed, how far apart you are, or how they might be changing, and also some emerging themes about the pressures of parental responsibility, which is in fact a theme I suspect will be significant in future books. So first, number one, pacing. This book's pacing is kind of all over the place, honestly. I tried to convey a bit of that with my summary, the more general summary, but really it is true. It is pretty hectic. I feel like the pacing per each section is pretty consistent. So like you have that first 300 pages, that's pretty consistent. You have stuff on the islands, that's pretty consistent. But it's just when we're shifting between the different sections of the book, that can be very jarring. Those kind of pace changes. And even though it should be exciting, like when our main characters are finally reunited, and even though a lot of like plot events and actions technically happening in the Edinburgh sections, despite all of that, the pacing change really at least slowed me personally down. And made me not exactly lose interest, but just like, okay, we're back to kind of where we were in the first two books. The couple makes love in their room for a while, then they go out and they deal with the day's emergency, then, you know, rinse and repeat kind of thing. Sure. And so it was easy for me to set this book aside for a while, even though I devoured those first 300 pages in just a few days, and I'm a pretty slow reader. And the pacing also feels like we spend a lot of time trying to get characters where they need to be for like a next big moment. And then that moment is exciting, but then resolved in 10 pages or so because something convenient came along, or a character just happened to be someone's friend from the past and was able to show up at the right time, at the right place, halfway across the world. So yeah, while the pacing definitely got me quite invested in certain individual stretches and sections of the book, on the whole, it's probably the weakest from a pacing standpoint in this series. It's just very uneven and jarring, and relies on too many lucky breaks for our characters. That Gabaldon, I feel like she's using these lucky breaks to just help her progress things, help move things along, and she doesn't kind of cover them up or disguise them very well. Number two, Jamie's character arc. Now, I feel like this is the book's real shining point, is what Gabaldon does with Jamie here. Because, by and large, most of the or all of the first book, and then probably 95% or so, maybe 96% or so of the second book, it's all Claire's first-person point of view. We don't get anything really closely with Jamie unless we're with Claire in those first two books. This is the first book where Gabaldon really lets us in there because Jamie and Claire are separated. And again, even though it's third person when she's writing with him, unlike the first person she writes with Claire, it's still close enough, and she takes us through enough important kind of sort of episodic plot beats of what Jamie's doing in the 20 years that he spends apart from Claire, to really flesh out his character. And I think one of the most important things she does with Jamie, I could go on and on about how much I already liked him because Claire liked him. After reading this book, I just like him, and that's just a kind of a bonus that Claire likes him, you know, or loves him. But something I think Gabaldon does really nicely is, I just mentioned just a moment ago that she kind of takes us through this sort of episodic structuring of, okay, the researchers find he's in this place, so now let's go back and let's kind of do a 50-page or so kind of episode, quote-unquote episode of Jamie and that thing. What's this sort of short story with Jamie about? Where does this take Jamie's character? By the end of the book, a lot of those episodes, a lot of those things that kind of at the beginning of the book might have just felt like we're just checking in on him, they really pay off in a character development way. A quick example, I flagged this section here. So there's one storyline where Jamie is in prison, and there is the warden at the prison, or the governor at the prison. He is romantically interested in Jamie, one of his prisoners, and they become friends. But Jamie has to make it clear, listen, I know I'm your prisoner, I'm at your mercy basically, but I don't want anything else. Jamie, if you're familiar with the series, you'll know he's been assaulted by a man before. So this is a very, very sensitive, traumatic thing for Jamie. And his friend, the new warden at the prison, he's a very respectful man, very honorable man named Lord John, who Gabaldon also wrote a bunch of side stories about. So yeah, there's that storyline. And this Lord John says, no, you know what? You do you. I do have really strong feelings for you, but I'm going to respect you, and I'm going to respect that we are friends, and just leave it at that. And then after that kind of episode, that's when Jamie's in prison. Then we go to the situation where Jamie is a stable boy, kind of like an indentured servant for a nice family, and the young heiress in the family, she has to marry some old rich snobby gross guy, and she doesn't want to lose her virginity to that gross guy, so she kind of makes Jamie have sex with her, and she's much obviously more attracted to him, even though he's an indentured servant stable boy, or stable hand. So we have these two instances of Jamie, or people being interested in Jamie for different reasons and being attracted to him. Then another kind of episode after the whole research, catch up with Jamie thing, once Claire's actually back in time, she finds out that in a bit that Gabaldon didn't show us, because she wanted to kind of, pull the rug out from under us, because we're again back with Claire's first person, after everything at the Hellwater estate, that's where Jamie was the stable hand, after everything there, Jamie has married another woman who is a kind of an antagonist from their past, from events in the first book. And obviously Claire's enraged when she finds this out, and we're all like, what? Where did this come from? Why was he with her? And so you have these kind of three different instances where three different people were interested in Jamie for slightly different reasons. And near the end, page 941, Jamie says this, Geneva, Willie's mother, she wanted my body. That's talking about the woman in the Hellwater estate. He said softly, watching the gecko's pulsing sides, Leary needed my name and the work of my hands to keep her and her bairns. And that's the woman he married. She really just wanted his money, just his labor, just those elements of a husband. And then he says, he turned his head then, dark blue eyes fixed on mine. John, well, he lifted his shoulders and let them drop. I couldn't give him what he wanted, and he is friend enough not to ask it. But how shall I tell you all these things, he said, the line of his mouth twisting, and then say to you, it is only you I have ever loved. How should you believe me? And again, that's at the end of a massive book, and in that we see why Gabaldon chose to tell those different episodic stories in the way that she did, so that when we get to a moment like that, we, like Claire, can better understand that Jamie, when he was at other people's mercy, he was willing to give up his body to Geneva. He was willing to give up his funds and kind of his time and marital status to Leary, but he was never willing to give up his love, his heart, to someone like Lord John, because he was still saving all of that just in case Claire ever came back. And so, yeah, even all of these episodic things at the beginning, when we get to the end, it all still matters. It's not just filler. It's not just to make a shorter book much, much longer, more than 1,000 pages. It really does all matter, and it comes together very nicely in the end. So yeah, that's number 2, Jamie's arc, just an example of how Gabaldon pulls these things together well to make really believable and really compelling characters. Okay, and then the third thing I want to talk about is just loving people no matter what's changed. This is a really big theme in Voyager. I think because our two protagonists, the two love interests, Claire and Jamie, spend so much time apart and they live so vastly different lives in the 20 years that open the book. Once we're back together, a lot of their more intimate scenes are them wondering what's changed about the other one. I don't think they ever think they can't trust the other person, but they definitely are. There's moments where they're uncomfortable with each other, and they really do, in some ways, have to learn to come to understand each other again. And so, even if you're not as into the action and what's going on the ships, what's going on a ship that has like the typhoid fever, and Claire, healing all the people with typhoid, if you're not that interested in the surprise twist at the end with who shows up to be our main antagonist, who's actually behind the kidnapping of young Ian. If you're not interested in that stuff, Gabaldon still gives us plenty of scenes with this sort of thematic core kind of focus on, do Jamie and Claire still accept each other and still love each other despite how much they've changed? And of course they do, but just watching them kind of learn to understand how they've evolved is really powerful stuff. And realizing that it doesn't change how much they love each other. If anything, they just love each other more and more as the book goes on. Also, just really quickly, there are some hints of more parental kind of responsibility themes in this book, but I suspect future books are going to get into this a little bit more. But on the one hand, you obviously have Claire raising Bree in the first part of the book, and kind of Bree's an adult now, and once Claire goes back in time, so she kind of has to let Bree, just be an adult and be a woman, just be mature on her own. And we kind of see when Claire goes back through the stones, Bree's not much younger than Claire was the first time Claire went through the stones. So there's a lot of that motherly love or mother-daughter relationship, and then the mother sort of having to let go, and the daughter coming to accept that this is something her mom needs to go back in time and try to reunite with the love of her life. And so that's kind of some hints that we get of the Claire-Bree dynamic. But then also on the flip side, you have a father-son dynamic that's really strong between Jamie and Fergus, and Fergus being the kind of pickpocket orphan that Jamie picks up in Paris in the second book, and through all of these kind of episodic check-ins with Jamie, and then when Claire catches up to him during his smuggling days, his smuggling in Edinburgh, we get to see how loving Jamie is of this boy, this young man who, similar to how Claire had to leave Bree when Bree was a woman, or was, grown, Jamie has to come to terms with the fact that Fergus is now old enough to marry Marcelly. That's a wedding that takes place kind of throughout the book. The actual wedding happens later, but they're handfast earlier on, and it's kind of a whole cute mess when they're on their way across the Atlantic. But yeah, so those are kind of the hints of parental themes that we get in Voyager. Again, based on what I've seen in the show and what I know is to come in future books, I expect those themes are going to get a lot more involved later on. So all that being said, I really love this book. Not quite as much as the first two, but still at least an 8, maybe even a 9 out of 10. Very good. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in any of my other Outlander content, please check out the videos I've made in my Outlander playlist over on my channel. And if you haven't already, it would mean a lot if you could like and subscribe. I really look forward to getting further into this wonderful series in 2023. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye.